This is Angel Coleman. Welcome to Book 4. And thank you for continuing to follow the story of our family saga.
Prologue. Hey Lucifer. Here's my hand, Tom said as he reached as far up as he could. Standing on his tiptoes, as he stood on the handrail of the back porch, he stretched his arms towards Lucifer. Help me up. Laying down, on his belly, Lucifer reached further than what he already had. With his attempts, his t-shirt fell towards his face, exposing his bare abdomen to the rough grit of the shingles to the house. There. Pull yourself up onto my arm now, Lucifer said just as he had grasped his friend's hand. Then, as Tommy complied with his request, Lucifer braced himself in a way that would prevent himself from being pulled off of the roof. Seconds later, Tom had pulled himself up, onto his knees, upon the bottom row of shingles. Okay Lucifer. Tom said as he stood up. Show me how to do this. It was now early morning of the day of Tommy's 13th birthday, June 14th. Just after 3:15. Lucifer's birthday, almost exactly 48 hours earlier, had started off with a bang as Lucifer had taken flight, in the bedroom, seemingly attaching him to his ceiling. The short-lived experience scared Lucifer at first, however, as soon as he gained control over his movements, he was able to, once again, stand on his own feet in the center of the room. Now, 2 days later, the two boys were determined that Tommy's experience would be much more pre-planned. You know Lucifer. Your strength, when you're attempting to use force, should have allowed you to pull me up here by one hand, Tom continued as they walked towards the highest peak of the house. Yeah. You're right, I forgot about it. Remember that this is only the second day for me. Lucifer responded and then stopped as he stood at the peak, overlooking 9th Street. Hey Tommy, listen. Looking at his watch, as he simultaneously pressed a button, causing its indigo light to shine, he continued. You'll be ready to fly in about 75 seconds. I'm gonna step off the edge and hold my hand out close, not holding your hand, but just close enough that I can quickly catch you when you step off of the edge. I want your intentions, however, to be to reach out to hold my hand. If this works, and it should, you'll depart from the roof of the house and then catch my open hand. And if it don't? I'll catch you Tommy. I promise that I won't allow anything to happen to you. I love you, I won't let anything happen to you. Lucifer explained as he looked at his watch again. Now we have 40 seconds left, Lucifer continued and then stepped off of the ledge, hovering off of the roughly 25-foot drop-off. Keeping direct eye-to-eye contact with Tom, Lucifer stretched out his arms. Now, when I say so, step towards me. Okay Lucifer. I trust you, Tom said and then, as he now stood on the ledge, reached out towards Lucifer. Just seconds later, just as Lucifer had told Tommy, Tom began to levitate as his body seemed to direct itself towards Lucifer. See? I told you that it would work Tommy, Lucifer said with glee in his voice. Over the last 2 days, since Lucifer's birthday, it had seemed that everything had been happening too fast. Now, just barely over 24 hours later, Tommy was also experiencing flight for the first time in his life. Beyond those that he had from the adults within their home, that is. Now, come on, Lucifer said as he took Tom's hand up in his own, let's go over the downtown area. Alright. Then maybe some other time we can go out to the sand rocks, Tom continued. As they flew, about 20 feet above the height of the houses below, Tommy slowly learned to lay down in a way that allowed for his legs to be behind him rather than below as if he were standing. This was the way that everyone else in Lucifer's family flew. Like as if they were laying their bellies on cushions of air. Legs behind and arms out to the side. Like an airplane. Or, I don't know, just anywhere. My dad said that him, my Uncle Ronnie, my Uncle Eddie and my mom went to Texas one time. I think that it would be cool to go on a trip like that sometime. As Lucifer finished speaking, he began to point towards the roof of a semi that was heading east on Interstate 40. Why are you pointing at that truck, Lucifer? Tom asked as he had simultaneously noticed something on the roof of the moving vehicle. What is that? With this question, Tom too pointed towards the truck. Moments later, as the two boys slowly approached the vehicle from behind and about 50 feet above, they had recognized the silhouette of a human being on its roof. That's odd. Tom thought. As the boys closed in to about 10 feet high, Lucifer, once again, pointed at the person. "Angel," Lucifer shouted. Then instantly the person turned to face his pursuant. "Where did you guys come from?" Angel asked just as Tommy and Lucifer landed beside him. As usual, Angel was wearing all black clothing along with his black leather coat. Through the darkness of the night and Angel's dark skin complexion, all that really showed was his eyes and teeth. Once in a while a overhead street light would light up his face. "We just left the house," Lucifer explained as he came to Angel's side. Instantly Angel partiality covered his face. "Congratulations on your flying. You've got a good family for teachers." "We," Lucifer interrupted, "have a good family for teachers. Angel, you're part of the family too." With this said, Lucifer wrapped his arm around his cousin. Chapter 1. "Hold on a minute," Tom yelled. It was very early in the morning when the sound of someone knocking on the door began. Turning away from Lucifer, as he continued to sleep, Tom looked at the clock across the room. "My God," Tom thought to himself, "I just went to bed 2 hours ago." Slowly dragging himself out of the bed, Tommy decided that he would skip putting on his jeans and just hide behind the downstairs door, in his boxers, as he opened it. After unlocking the door, Tommy quietly pulled the steel door towards himself to find the neighbor, Mrs. Bruce, staring back at him. "Hi Tommy. Is Malachi and Nicole awake by any chance?" the heavy-set woman asked with a big smile on her face. "Ah. I'm not sure Mrs. Bruce," Tom replied as he then looked at his wrist forgetting that he wasn't wearing his watch. "I doubt it though. Would you like me to?" "I'm up." Malachi's voice interrupted from behind him. "What's up Mrs. Bruce?" Malachi had woken up to the sound of Tom's voice bellowing from his room just moments prior. Quickly throwing on a pair of pants, he went out to the top of the landing, and then looked down the steps where Mrs. Bruce stood on the opposite side of the door from Tommy. "Oh hi Malachi," the woman said as she looked around Tom. "May I please come in to speak to you for a moment? I didn't mean to wake you guys up." "Yeah. I guess that would be alright," Malachi said, then crossed his arms as he placed his hands in his armpits. The cool September morning had began to blow gusts of cold air through the house as Mrs. Bruce stared back up at him. With Malachi's response, Tommy opened the door wide enough to allow Lloyd's mother to pass through. Seconds later, after Tom closed the door, Mrs. Bruce turned and found Tommy to be only wearing his boxers. "Oh Tommy. Don't you know that summer is over, honey?" As the question came out of her mouth, Tommy seemed to have wrapped himself within his own arms and legs right before her eyes. Then, without another word, the woman turned back, towards Malachi, as she headed up the steps. "Well, what can I do for you today Mrs. Bruce?" Malachi asked as he led the way into the kitchen. Seconds later, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Tommy, nearly naked, quickly dart down the hallway. "Well honey. Actually I'm here for someone else," Mrs. Bruce said as she sat down at the table. "Have you ever heard of a man named Stan Helsel?" Immediately following her question she saw a puzzled look cross Malachi's face. "Anyway hun. This man has a son named Scott. 6 years ago, when Scott was born, he was diagnosed, by the doctors, with progeria." "Yeah." Malachi interrupted, "I remember seeing the article in the paper years ago." "That's right." The woman responded as she pointed at the 33-year-old, "The article was on the front page. Anyway, I was talking to Stan, alone to where no one could hear our conversation, and I had mentioned to him that I knew of a place where when his son passes on that his spiritual being could continue to live." As she continued to speak she saw a look of surprise cross Malachi's face. "Don't worry Malachi, I didn't tell him where." Suddenly, along with her supportive comment, Mrs. Bruce peered towards her own left hand as an impression of a child's hand and fingers had appeared on her skin. Lightly, with her right hand, she attempted to hold her son's hand. With her attempt, she felt a tingle that made her face seem to glow. "Hello Lloyd." She interrupted herself. "I love you son," she said as she stared at her own arm. Then, as she looked back towards Malachi, Simultaneously continuing to hold her son's hand, she continued, I told Stan that his son would have friends his own age. Malachi, the doctors say that Scott will be passing away soon. I really need to know if it's alright if the child dies in your home. His parents are not prepared to lose him, this child is so. Mrs. Bruce. Malachi interrupted, yes. It's alright with me. Let me check with Nicole first, but then I'll let you know. I'm sure that it'll be okay with her too. Wow. We're gonna have another friend. James said as him and Sterling both watched Lloyd hold on to his mom's hand. That'll be cool. Yeah. That will be nice. Sterling commented as he stood beside Lloyd and put his hand on the 8-year-old's shoulder. Lloyd's eyes had begun to water as excitement raced through his body. It had been at least 4 months since he had seen his mom, especially now that Tommy and Lucifer can't see us anymore. I remember how cool it was when Jason was with us. Until he crossed over, that is. James commented. The memories of their friend was just as fresh as if it was only yesterday that Jason, Lucifer, and Tommy had regularly played together and took learning lessons from himself, Lloyd, and Sterling. Well, we'll just have to make Scott understand that crossing over is something that will take him completely away from his parents and away from his parents' wishes. Sterling said as he had also began to rub Lloyd's back. Remember that we had tried to convince Jason of that also. He still crossed over. James said. I know that. But what we've got to do is make it known from day one with Scott. We can't wait until the last second this time. Convincing takes time. As Sterling continued to speak, he walked away from Lloyd's side and towards James' side, where he knelt down to one knee. Now, with direct eye-to-eye contact, Sterling continued, we can't screw this up, James. Then, as he looked back towards Lloyd, who in turn had began to pay attention to their conversation, he continued. If we're gonna do this, guys, let's do it right. Later that same day, just after sundown, everyone was just getting up from an early breakfast as they waited on the visit from the Helsel family. With this visit, from a family that they had never met, only read about, until that very morning when Mrs. Bruce had come to visit, everyone was preparing for a complete stranger to move in with them. How about I go ahead and wash the dishes real quickly? Ronnie volunteered, hey Angel, would you please help me? Looking at Angel, he had almost immediately saw a smile stretch ear to ear. Simultaneously, Angel removed his t-shirt and laid it over the back of one of the chairs at the table. Yeah. I'll help you, Ron, Angel said, then picked up a stack of 10 plates up off of the table. Though Angel, even at the age of 19, still very much looked like a 10-year-old, without exaggeration, as he still, to this point in his life, couldn't grow body hair, was small like a 10-year-old, and had a gentle and warm voice of a 10-year-old as well. He had become a very mentally mature individual as he had often helped around the house. About 20 minutes later, just as the boys were finishing the dishes, the doorbell began to ring, causing everyone to suddenly come to order at the top of the stairs. Then, just as everyone was together, Malachi and Nicole, together, headed to the door and opened it. Looking back at them was an older gentleman holding a child-sized person in his arms whom had the appearance of an 40 to 45-year-old man. With this appearance, however, he was small like a child, with front teeth that looked either deformed or fake. Ah, hi. Are you guys Mr. and Mrs. Malachi Clue? Yes, we are, Mr. Helsel. Nicole answered, and this must be Scott. Right? She asked and then reached out to carefully hold on to Scott's hand. Yes, ma'am. Stan responded as he stepped into the doorway and bent forwards to set his son down onto his feet. Just hold on, buddy, he whispered into Scott's ear as he had also slung an oxygen tank down off of his shoulder. As you guys can see, Scott has respiratory problems and he is on a lot of medications as well. And Mr. Helsel, please just come on in and come upstairs. We can get the details patched out as we go along, Malachi said as he then also leaned forward, and down to one knee, as he looked the child face to face. Hey Scott. He then said to the obviously shy kid, how would you like a lift upstairs? Yes please, Scott replied in an oddly high-pitched voice. Simultaneously the youngster raised his arms high into the air, Then, once Scott had felt that the stranger's arms were firmly wrapped around him, he lowered his head on the man's shoulder. Then, as they reached the top of the steps, they grouped with the rest of the household as they entered the kitchen. "Hi Scott," Lucifer said as he leaned up against his father. As Malachi stood still, so that maybe Scott might respond to his son, he then carefully placed his right hand on Scott's back, between his shoulder blades. "Hello." The young boy responded with a squeaky voice. Without moving his head, Scott rolled his eyes around to see the many faces that stared back at him. One fact, particularly, that stood out was that of someone that was wearing a black leather coat. That individual approached them, beside the person that had just said hi, and then carefully held onto Scott's balled-up fist that clung tightly onto Malachi's upper body. "Well, Mr. Dot and Mrs. DeClue," Scott's father began to speak. The man had walked close behind Malachi as they walked up the Dot stairs and into the kitchen. "What all would you guys want in return for allowing my son to stay here with you guys? I know that it..." "Mr. Helsel," Nicole spoke up, "all that we want in return is that you make sure that your son knows that you love him." "But, he knows that I love him," Stan said very defensively. "I have always loved him, and that's why I want his being to still be present after he passes." "Why isn't Scott's mom here?" Malachi asked as he turned to face the man. "What part of your son's death is in it for her?" "Sir, this was hard for Tracy. You see, it has been too hard for either one of us to continue fighting a battle that will never be won. We've tried everything. And now, our doctor said that most likely Scott wouldn't survive another 48 hours. This battle began 6 years ago when he was born. Neither one of us are prepared to see him pass away." As the man spoke, tears began to fill his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Helsel," Malachi said, "I just want to make sure that Scott's best interests are being looked out for." As Malachi continued to hold the child, it had felt as though Scott's life was running out within that very moment. As he held on just a little tighter to the tyke, he tilted his head towards Scott, just enough to feel the kid's warm skin up against his own cheek. "Honey." Nicole interrupted the moment of silence following Stan's explanation. One ETS lay him down on the living room couch. Instantly everyone, as they followed behind Malachi and Scott, headed out to the living room and watched as Malachi laid him down. Without moving much, Scott remained in the fetal position as Nicole covered him up with a quilt. Carefully, Stan then laid the oxygen tank down beside the couch and out of the way. "So, should I go and get his clothes then? I've got them out in the..." "No, Mr. Helsel," Angel suddenly interrupted. With Angel's interruption, however, nobody in the house seemed to be disturbed by Angel's voice. Everyone seemed to be in tune, instead, to Scott's existence and place as Angel moved up, through the small crowd, towards Scott's side. He only had a few minutes left. "By the time that you would return from your car, he'll be gone." Now, as he kneeled down beside the couch, Angel carefully rolled Scott's head to where he could look deep into the child's eyes. Instantly, with the eye-to-eye contact, Scott's body seemed to fully extend as his back bowed. With this, the child's eyes opened wide, and then suddenly the gleam of light, within his eyes, reflected from the kitchen, seemed to have turned into a dull shade. With it, Scott's breathing then also stopped as his body relaxed. "Oh no," Stan said as Nicole and Belinda both put their arms around the stranger. "He's gone." "It's all right, Mr. Helsel," Belinda interrupted, "your son is..." "Hi Scott." Sterling quietly called out as he kneeled beside Angel, "My name is Sterling and I would like to be friends with you." As he continued to watch the child, he saw Scott's eyes switch back and forth between himself and Angel. "What's happening to me?" Scott asked as he sat up on the couch. Then, as he continued to sit, with his legs still on the couch, he turned to look back towards where he was laying to find himself. "I'm scared, guys. What's happening to me?" "They can't hear you, Scott." "Only I can," Sterling said as he now stood beside Scott and Angel. "Give me your hand, Scott. I'll explain to you what is happening." As confused as Scott felt, by the fact that he had just seen a double of himself, and the fact that that double had the attention of everyone else in the room, including his own father, Scott seemed delighted to follow the direction of the only person who seemed to acknowledge him. Carefully, Scott grasped onto Sterling''s hand, and then walked with him out of the living room. "Where are we going?" "Not far. Just downstairs to where you can meet some of my other friends," Sterling explained as he continued to lead the way through the kitchen and then down the stairs. "You know, Scott, things are gonna be a lot different for you now." "What do you mean different?" the tyke asked as he looked up towards his companion. "Well, for instance, how do you feel right now?" Sterling asked as he looked down towards Scott. "I don't know. I feel..." Seemingly lost for words, Scott quickly used his hand to feel his side, and then traced an imaginary line towards his upper lip. "Where's my oxygen tube?" "You don't need it anymore, Scott." Then, just as Sterling answered the question, they both reached the bottom level of the house where there were two other boys, much closer to Scott's age, waiting for them. "Hey Scott. This is James and Lloyd. They live here too and they're great friends." "Hello Scott," James said as he stood forward and held out his hand to their new friend. "I'm Lloyd," Lloyd said and then looked up to Sterling. "Why does he look different, Sterling?" "Look different? Guys. What is different here is that Scott is no longer sick," Sterling replied as he then also set his hand on Scott's shoulder. "It is still, very much, Scott Helsel. Just a newer version of him." "What is different about me?" Scott asked as he looked up towards Sterling. "You're healthy now, Scott," James answered for Sterling. "Many of the physical features about you, that you and many other people remember, were based off of progeria. The disease that killed you." "Killed me?" Scott whispered. "Yeah. Scott, you died upstairs just a few minutes ago. Now, however, you are all done being sick, all done with taking all of those medications, and all done looking like that you have progeria." "But I had dreams that I wanted to live up to," Scott said in a sad tone of voice. "What kind of dreams?" Lloyd asked. I wanna be an astronaut and travel in outer space. I wanna see other planets, and I wanna see Andromeda." "And Scott," Lloyd interrupted, "I can almost guarantee that your heart and soul will spend the rest of eternity teaching about outer space." "I haven't lived it to teach it. How am I gonna spend the rest of eternity teaching about Jupiter and its satellites, Io, Ganymede, Callisto, and Europa if I don't?" "Wow. Slow down here, a minute dude. How did I know all of that stuff?" "I bet that you know a whole lot more than just that, Scott," Lloyd said. "Tell me a little more about Io." "Well," Scott began, "Io is the closest satellite to Jupiter. It was found, in 1979, to have active volcanoes. Static energy from Io to Jupiter is very high, about 40,000 amps, causing severe storms. Io is the largest satellite of Jupiter and was discovered in 1610. There are over 300 active volcanoes on Io and is minus 200 degrees below zero in some areas, while other areas have the hottest lava in the Milky Way. Guys, I could go on and on with this. It's cool. And it sounds like that it's gonna be cool having you here with us," Sterling said as he knelt down beside Scott. "How would you like to go into the bathroom and look into a mirror?" "Yeah," Scott answered and then imagined what all that could possibly be different now that progeria wasn't in control of him. "I would like to see what all is different then." Just as Scott had finished his sentence, all four of the boys' attention was shook by the sound of the upstairs door opening as officers and a medical examiner all filed in. "Hey Scott. Come on, don't worry about what is happening up there. We have better things to do down here." With this said, Sterling stood at the end of the hallway, near Dondi's bedroom, as he watched Scott stare up the staircase. Then, just as a gurney, led by an officer, came into sight, Lloyd came and stood between Scott and the steps, blocking the view. "Scott. You don't need to see what is happening up there right now. Later, we'll all go up there. Let's go, buddy." Sterling pushed. Seconds later, Lloyd, James, Scott, and Sterling walked into the restroom with Scott leading the way. Turning, once in the small bathroom, to see the mirror on the inside backing of the door, Scott looked silently at the image that stared back at him. "Wah. Oh my God," Scott said in a soft voice as he simultaneously felt the side of his own face with his right hand, It doesn't even look like me. I look like a normal person. As Scott continued to stare at the mirror, his eyes began to water as the handsome figure continued to look back at him. You know, Scott, Sterling said as he stood behind the 6-year-old, you always have been a good-looking kid. Progeria, however, is very ugly and cruel to those that have it. Pausing, as Sterling rested a hand on each of Scott's shoulders, he then bent forward and put his mouth close to Scott's ear and neck. Something that you should know though, is that both of your parents loved you very much. And it's through that love that your parents learned about us living here in this house and wanted the same for you. Also, Scott, God loves you too and wants you to always be happy. Will I ever see my parents again? Scott asked as he looked back at Sterling through the reflection in the mirror. Yeah. And you'll talk to them too. That's the reason that your parents had brought you here to die. You see, Scott. Sterling continued as he also turned Scott, by the shoulders, to face him. We have someone, living here, that is able to make it to where we can talk to people that are still alive. It's called a seance. And, between the times that we do our seance, we teach their children and protect the family. Often we just mentor those that live here. After about an additional 5 minutes or so, all 4 of the boys decided to head upstairs and see the rest of the family. For Scott, however, his intentions were to show his father his new appearance. This intention, obviously, was with a large lack of understanding about seances. This misunderstanding was painfully clear to Scott, as he had seen his father and couldn't gain his attention. Only during a seance Scott. James reminded him. Stan was now sitting in the kitchen talking to Malachi, Ronnie, Belinda, and Nicole about the use of seances to communicate with the dead. While the adults continued to talk together, James, Lloyd, Sterling, and Scott walked out of the kitchen and down the hallway towards Tommy's, Lucifer's, and Macaulay's room. Just as they had almost reached the bedroom door, the door suddenly opened as both Eddie and Angel walked out. Instantly, just as Scott's eyes fixed themselves on Angel, the 6-year-old froze. "What's wrong, Scott?" James asked. That guy." Stuttering as he spoke, Scott began to point towards Angel. "He took my last breath from me before Sterling brought me downstairs earlier." "That guy's name is Angel," James said as he reached out and lowered Scott's hand. "He wouldn't hurt ya. He just kinda pushed the envelope for your passing. Sometimes, when someone is on the verge of dying, and that person has suffered for a long time, sometimes you've gotta be told to leave that body and cross into eternal life. You should thank him when you participate in your first seance." "I should thank Angel for killing me," Scott repeated as an extremely puzzled look crossed over his face. "No, silly," Sterling said as he set his hand on Scott's shoulder. "You should thank him for making you stop hurting." With that said, all 4 of the kids walked into the boys' bedroom. Laying down, on his belly, as he colored in his coloring book, Macaulay had almost forgot that his roommates, Lucifer and Tommy, were in the room as well just below him. Eddie and Angel had just left after announcing that the 3 of them had dealt well with the events surrounding the young stranger's death. Then, just seconds after Angel and Eddie left, Macaulay had suddenly noticed Lloyd, James, Sterling, and then some other kid walk into me room. "Hi Sterling," Macaulay immediately announced. With the outburst from the 8-year-old, Lucifer and Tommy both crawled off of their bottom bunk. "You see Sterling right now?" Lucifer asked. One of the downfalls of growing older, for Tom and Lucifer anyhow, is the loss of ability for them to see their ghostly friends. Without a seance, that is. "Yeah. Sterling, Lloyd, James, and someone else." "Is it Scott?" Tommy asked. "No. It doesn't." Macaulay. "Yes, it is Scott," Sterling interrupted. With the short pieces of conversation, Scott was looking confused. "Ah. Lucifer and Tommy. Sterling says that it is Scott." By now, Macaulay was climbing down the factory-made ladder, to the bunk, to greet his friends. "Say hi, Scott," Sterling said as he looked towards the boy. "Hi, Macaulay," Scott said and then stuck his hand out to shake Macaulay's. With his attempt, His hand only passed through Macaulay's hand, making absolutely no physical connection of any kind. "Scott," Sterling interrupted, "I'll have to show you later how to touch other physical objects. For now, however, as you know," pointing at Macaulay, "this is Macaulay. And this," pointing at Tom, "is Tommy, and this is Lucifer. Tommy nor Lucifer can see us outside of a seance. They used to be able to see us, but, as they got older, that changed." As Sterling continued to teach Scott, Tommy and Lucifer immediately left the room together. "Hey Dad," Lucifer called out as he entered the living room. Pretty much all of the adults, in the house, were still gathered together with Scott's father, discussing the process together about the seance that they would soon perform so that Stan and Tracy could both see their late child. "Lloyd, James, Sterling, and Scott are all in my bedroom. Macaulay is talking to them right now." "Good," Malachi gasped, "you see Stan. Everything is working out just fine for your son. He already has friends even." As Malachi continued to speak to Stan, he could see that the man's eyes began to water. After Scott's death earlier, the man had began to uncontrollably cry as the child's lifeless body removed from the home. "So, when would be a good time to come over here tomorrow?" Stan asked as he gained his composure. Just after Scott had died, he had called Tracy, on their cell phone, to alert her to their son's passing. "How about 10 o'clock tomorrow night?" Malachi answered then. As Malachi stood up, he looked at both Tom and Lucifer. "You two stay here for a moment. I'm gonna go talk to James, Lloyd, Sterling, and Scott real quickly." "Should I come?" Stan asked as he began to stand up. "You can if you would like to. You nor I are gonna see them right now though. I'll be speaking to them through my nephew, Macaulay." "Oh, that'll be fine," Stan said as he quickly got to his feet and wiped his eyes dry with his sleeve. "I just wanna make sure that he knows that I know what is up with him." "Sounds good to me," Malachi said as he turned towards the hallway. "Let's go and talk to them." "Hey Sterling. Come on," Macaulay complained, "please put it back down here." The 8-year-old was showing Scott his Hot Wheels collection when Sterling decided to pick up Macaulay's favorite one of an antique. A 1992 Mercury Sable. With it between his fingers, Sterling held it high off of the ground, causing Macaulay to stand on his toes as he reached for it. "Stretch a little higher," Sterling joked, and then looked up to see the bedroom door opening. "Hi guys," Malachi announced as Scott's father stood beside him. Instantly Malachi noticed his nephew standing on his tiptoes reaching for a toy that was floating well above Malachi's ability to reach. "Hey Sterling, I don't think that it's very nice to use your height as an advantage against an 8-year-old. Give it back to him." Stan was instantly shocked as he watched the toy seem to float softly into the palm of Macaulay's right hand. "Thank you Sterling," Macaulay said and then turned to face his uncle and Scott's father. "Hey Macaulay. Is Scott still in here with you?" Malachi asked as him and Stan both walked in. "Yeah. He's right here," he responded as he simultaneously pointed to his left. "Hey Macaulay," Scott interrupted, "please tell my dad that I love him," the 6-year-old said as he stood to his feet facing his father. "Hey Stan. Scott says that he loves you." As he spoke to the man, Scott walked right up to his father. "Scotty. Your mom and I are gonna be here tomorrow night. We're gonna be able to actually see you buddy." As Stan spoke, it was by mere coincidence that he was looking directly at his son. If you had been Macaulay, Sterling, James, Lloyd, or Scott, you'll swear that Stan was able to see his son. "Good night son. We love you." "One love you too daddy," Scott responded. "Hey Mr. Helsel. Scott says that he loves you too." As Macaulay relayed the message for Scott, Sterling, James, and Lloyd all stood behind Scott as they patted him on the back. It was about 24 hours later when Sterling, James, Lloyd, and Scott had all gathered together in the basement. As they waited on Stan and Tracy to show up, they entertained both Macaulay and Dondi as they played Simon Says. Then, about 10 minutes after they had arrived, everyone came downstairs with Eddie leading the way. Okay folks. Eddie instructed, let's all gather here in a big circle. Immediately everyone sat down in a large circle with the center about 10 foot in diameter. I've got to tack down this string. As he spoke, he pulled out about a 50-foot length of white string, and then light these candles. Handing the candles to Angel, Angel then immediately began to light them. Ah. Tommy, would you please catch the light switch? Yep. Instantly, just as asked out of him, Tom got up to his feet, leaving everyone else at the circle. Seconds later the room was dark. Sitting beside one another, both Stan and Tracy took each other's hand. All right, Scott. Sterling spoke up as he leaned forward and rested his arm over the 6-year-old's shoulder. In a second, Eddie is gonna. Which one is Eddie? Scott interrupted. Eddie is the one that just had Angel light the candles. Okay. Sterling answered. All right. Now, when he starts to talk, in a way that sounds kinda weird, as he will be speaking to us, the center of the circle will begin to glow in a greenish color. Almost a neon green. Anyway, when that glowing begins, you need to walk into the light. Will it hurt? Scott asked. No. It won't hurt you. All that it does is allow everyone to see your body. My newbie? Scott interrupted again. Yeah. They'll see your new body. In fact, Sterling continued, they might be shocked at first, but that's only because they'll be expecting to see your sick body. Just let them know that you're not sick anymore. All right, thank you. We're gathered here. Shh. Here we go. Today to bring to light the love between Scott and that of his parents as they await this moment to be reunited with their son. From James, Lloyd's, Sterling's, and Scott's point of view, a dim glow of a greenish light began to hover, like a ball, off of the floor within the center of the circle. Scott Helsel, would you please join us in this circle and show? All right, Scott. Walk in there. James instructed. Yourself. Instantly a face appeared in the center of the circle. With this unfamiliar face there was a demoniac voice that had, just seconds later, began to sound like that of Scott. Hi Mom and Dad. Scott said as he faced his parents, I miss you guys. Scott? Stan said with question in his voice. I know that it doesn't look like me, Dad. But that's because I'm no longer sick. Oh Scott, Tracy said as she began to cry, you look so handsome. I'm so happy for you, son. Thank you, Mom. And you know what, Mom? What's that, baby? Tracy asked as she wiped her face dry. Simultaneously she held on tighter to Stan's hand as well. It's because of you and Dad that I look like this. It's because of your love for me that I no longer hurt. As Scott continued to talk, he could see tears building up in the eyes of both of his parents. What was also obvious from where Scott was standing, was the high level of love within his parents, and, Mom and Dad. It's through your love, for me, that you two decided to bring me to the Decluse home where I could continue to enjoy life. I love you guys so much. We love you too, Scotty, Stan said. Hey, Mom and Dad. Pausing, mid-sentence as he saw Angel out of the corner of his eye, he turned to face him. Angel. No offense, but when you kneeled down beside the couch yesterday, to make me cross over, you scared me. Since then, however, I've found that you are a good person. Thank you for what you did. You're welcome, Scott. I wouldn't do anything to intentionally harm you. I would, however, do something to prevent you from hurting. Sometimes that means scaring your soul right out of your body. Well. Thank you, Angel. I'll credit this new chapter of my life to you and everyone here. Guys. Lloyd wants to speak to you as well. I love you guys. After everyone responded to his goodbye, Scott looked towards Lloyd, who smiled back at him. Good job, bud. Lloyd said, and then walked into the circle as Scott stepped out. Hi guys. Lloyd said. Hi Lloyd, Tommy said instantly. It's been a long time since I've seen you. Well, Tom. It's been a long time since we've talked to you. We get to see you all of the time though. Tommy, this is your first seance too. Lloyd said in reference to Stan and Tracy. ... Congratulations. Hello Lloyd. Malachi spoke up. Turning, To face his old friend, he looked Malachi in the face. "Hey. You guys made the right choice with Scott. He deserves better than what his old body was giving him. And all of you guys," Lloyd said as he slowly turned, in one place, as he looked at everyone, making eye contact. "Guys. So much has happened to this family over the years. No matter how much happens though, it almost seems odd that absolutely nothing has been able to break the bond of love that runs deep in this family." Pausing, as Lloyd turned to face both Stan and Tracy again, he continued, "Folks, listen. Eddie can perform these seances as often as he is willing. There's something in it for us too. Not just you guys. But in order for any of this to continue, we needed to remain quiet. If everyone knew that ghosts were constantly in contact with the living at 890 Finley Lane, the house would never see rest again. The whole town of Craig, Colorado for that matter." Angel interrupted. And Angel just might be right," Lloyd said as he smiled at Angel's statement. "Therefore, Stan and Tracy, we need to keep a lid on our little get-togethers." "We will," Tracy said, "I promise." "Alright guys. James and Sterling wanna talk to you guys also. Keep cool guys. Bye." With Lloyd's last word, he quickly waved at his friends as he had also stepped out of the light. "Alright James," Lloyd said as he gave his friend a high five, "your turn." Then, as Lloyd proceeded out of the circle, he went over to Sterling's and Scott's side as they stood just behind Scott's parents. Looking into Scott's face, Lloyd could see him smiling back. "Hello guys," James said as he stepped into the glowing light. "Nice to see you guys doing alright. Also, I think that you guys have dealt with Scott's situation well." Pausing as he turned to face Ronnie, he saw a smile instantly grow from ear to ear. "Hi Ron. How are you doing, my friend?" "I'm doing good. How about yourself?" "Actually Ronnie, I'm doing good. I'm happy to see that there hasn't been any major problems here." "Hey James," Ronnie said with a tone of question in his voice. "Yeah? Do you ever think about the past?" "Sometimes. Normally when I do though, the first thing that comes to mind is me running from one tree to another trying to hide my naked body from the very crowded city park." As James continued to speak, the smile on Ronnie's face began to deepen as the memory of the stunt that he pulled on his friend refreshed within his memory. "What?" Angel asked with a smile on his face too. "There's a time that we had all been at the city park," Ron began to explain. "As a prank, after we had already been swimming, I took James' shorts and towel while he was in the shower house. About 20 minutes later he sticks his head out, looks around, and then began to walk, bare naked, through the park. Then Malachi interrupted, came to the rescue." As Malachi spoke, though only Lloyd, Sterling, and James could hear it, Scott began to uncontrollably laugh at the event of the past. "Hey Stan and Tracy," James called out as he turned to face the couple who had also smiled at the revelation of the past. "Your son is rolling around on the floor laughing real hard at this incident." In response, both Stan and Tracy just smiled at the fact that their son was enjoying himself. "Well guys. That's all from me. I'll talk to you all again later. Here's Sterling." "Well, Mr. and Mrs. Helsel," Sterling said as instantly all heads looked upward. "My name is Sterling Ross and I am Macaulay's and Dondi's teacher. With this, Lloyd, James, and I will be your son's friends as he helps us take care of and mentor this family. Mr. and Mrs. Helsel. This family, like any other, is very unique. After all, how often do you spend time in a conversation with a dead kid? Well, in this house, we have 4 dead kids, including myself. I'm the oldest. I was 16 when I died. There are many things about this home that makes this a unique and enjoyable place for your son to spend eternity." "Hey Sterling." Ronnie spoke up, "You, James, Lloyd, and then Scott, do a lot for our family. I know, just as well as everyone else that lives here, that you guys are hardly ever thanked for the many things that you do for us. You guys met us in life and then died within our lives. 3 out of the 4 of you actually died in our home. Then you guys became our teachers and mentors. Since then, you've been teachers and mentors to our children. And then, all along, and still today, you guys are some of our best friends. I know that I'm speaking for all of us when I say this. We all thank you more than you'll ever know." I agree, Belinda said. I remember years ago when I was learning about the different things about this family. I was scared at first. Yet, just as Ronnie explained, you guys have done so much for us in this family. And I thank you. Me too, Tommy said before anyone else had a chance. Ever since I moved in with this family, you guys have taught me more than what I could have ever learned at any public school. You've been our playmates, and you've been our friends. Well guys, Sterling said as he looked each individual person eye to eye, you guys were, are and always will be our friends. I understand that you guys feel that we've done so much for you. The fact is though is that we love what we're doing. We love each other, and also, we love each one of you guys. And to top it all off, we thank you guys very much. Guys, it's time for us to get going now. Please call us to order again soon, Eddie. We always look forward to it. Opening his eyes, he had, once again, for the second time in 1 week, found himself within the all-too-familiar fog-covered dungeon. Immediately Macaulay had put himself on high alert as he knew that soon, the old man, that had haunted him and the rest of his family, for many years, would soon be on his ankles. Something was different this time. Off into the distance, if he held his own breath so that he could hear, he could make out what sounded like metal hitting metal. Also, as he looked up ahead of himself, he could make out what looked like big blocks about 100 feet ahead of himself. Curious, Macaulay headed towards those objects. Then, as he got closer, he could see that they stood about his own height and were made of cement. Walking right up to one of the cement boxes, he could see that on top of each one of them, there was also a lid that was also made out of cement as well. Oddly, comparing the one that he stood next to, as opposed to the others, this one had no dust on its top. In fact, this one appeared to have been intentionally cleaned. Yet, at the same time, he could also see that there were no foot tracks within the thick layer of dust and dirt on the floor. Investigating a step further, Macaulay decided to climb up on top of the cement box and see what was on its lid. From where he stood, on the ground, he could make out some sort of emblem engraved within the cement. Moments later, as he stood on his knees and hands, he was looking down at the emblem that was of a cross, on top of a ribbon, with something written below it. The words were, Angel Coleman, born October 31st, died on. There was no death date, however. Macaulay knew now what it was that he was looking at. Suddenly, out of the distance, the sound of steps had replaced the sound of metal hitting metal. As Macaulay listened carefully, he could hear the footsteps coming closer and closer to him. "Where are you, little boy?" The voice of Miguel sounded out, echoing off of the dungeon walls. "I know that you're down here," Miguel continued, and then began to chuckle loudly. "Ha ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha." Quickly, Macaulay decided to lay down in hopes that, if Miguel found him, that perhaps he might just leave him alone. Yet, at the same time, he also feared that most likely, that the old man wouldn't leave him alone. It was this fear that caused Macaulay to climb back down off of the burial vault and then hide behind it. At first, just prior to getting down to the floor, Macaulay noticed that the dreadful voice and footsteps of the old man had disappeared. Then, just as he landed on the floor, he once again heard the footsteps coming towards him. "Trying to be sneaky, are you?" Macaulay heard him say again. Looking behind himself, Macaulay found that there was a wall behind him. With this finding, he decided that that side of the vault would be best for him to hide behind. Moments later, just as it sounded as though Miguel was only a few feet away, he now only heard Miguel's breathing. Looking out from the corner of the cement box, he peered around the box and towards the other nearby boxes. Then, as he focused his eyes on the edge of the furthest vault, about 20 feet away, he could see the leg of the old man as he just stood there watching and listening to every sound that he might make. Macaulay had even began to pace his breathing in hopes that Miguel wouldn't hear it. Then suddenly the man's leg moved out of Macaulay's sight. Daring himself to move, Macaulay carefully stuck his head out a little further, hoping to find the beast again. With this effort, however, he had accidentally allowed his shoe to drag against the floor. In response, he heard the old man quickly moving from the approximate area that he was at, to the point that it sounded as though Miguel might be right behind him. Now, Macaulay was scared to even breath. Much more to even just turn and look behind himself. He couldn't hear anything. Yet now, With the feeling that he should look behind himself, he turned his head only to find himself staring into the eyes of Miguel. Instantly, as the old man meant to grab him, he had instead pushed the young boy's body across the dirt-covered floor, causing him to almost run into another vault. "Help me!" Macaulay hollered as he had immediately tried to find another way to hide himself. Before he could find anything, however, the old man, on his hands and knees, had crawled himself right to Macaulay's side again and tried to lay his upper body over the kid to restrain him, when suddenly Macaulay had quickly found his way to his feet and darted off into a darkened area of the dungeon. Once hidden within the dark, Macaulay immediately turned himself around and located the old man still on his hands and knees staring towards him. "Come on, little boy. Come on over here and play with me. I won't hurt ya. I'm just feeling a little hungry. That's all," Miguel taunted. "Leave me alone," Macaulay hollered back. Then, just as Miguel had momentarily turned his head, Macaulay quickly and silently moved into another darkened area. Once protected within the shaded area, Macaulay suddenly noticed that Miguel had turned towards the area that Macaulay had just left. "He still thinks that I'm over there," the child thought to himself. "I've tricked him." "Oh. We know how to play games, do we?" Miguel said quietly under his breath, just loud enough that Macaulay could just make out the words. "Come play with me and I'll show you some better games. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha."